Welcome to today's Explainer. So today we are diving into this super fascinating journal entry from July 2026, written by an aquarist named Ang. And look, this isn't just your standard everyday logbook. It is a real deep dive into the meticulous trial and error process of putting together the absolute perfect mating tank for a very specific dwarf cichlid. We're going to unpack some really profound lessons here about what it takes to practice structured, truly empathetic animal care.
Right off the bat, Ang writes this really honest line. My previous attempt at introducing one didn't end well, and I'm not sure of the root cause. That kind of sets the stakes for us today, right? Because fish keeping, especially when you're trying to encourage natural behaviors like mating, it's definitely not plug and play. It is this huge iterative process filled with all these invisible variables. And actually, it's that unknown root cause that completely drives the cool optimizations we're about to look at.
So that brings us to the core mystery. How do you actually build a better environment for Kribensis cichlids? Where a tank fails to support its inhabitants, you really have to take a step back and figure out what's missing. Or, honestly, what is the environment telling the animal to do versus what the animal naturally wants to do? It all comes down to stripping away our own human preferences and rigorously redesigning the whole setup based purely on what the fish are telling us.
Now, before we get into the specific environmental tweaks, we need to know exactly who we're designing for. We're looking at pelvicachromis-pulcher, which is widely known as the Kribensis-cichlid. These dwarf cichlids have incredibly strong, heavily ingrained instinctual behaviors. And the whole point of a mating tank is to make them feel secure enough to breed. It's pretty simple. If their fundamental instincts aren't being met by the physical layout of the tank, well, mating just isn't going to happen. No way.
Okay, so the turning point in Ang's approach really came down to one very simple behavioral observation. The dwarf cichlids strongly preferred hiding at the back of the tank. And what's great here is that Ang didn't just guess what they wanted. Instead, Ang just sat back and watched their stubborn habits. They wanted to be out of the open, as far away from the glass as possible. This biological demand for security is absolutely crucial. It's the foundation of great animal husbandry. You literally have to watch what animals do when they think nobody is watching.
Let's look a little closer at the massive disconnect between that original design and the fish's actual behavior. In the first setup, an artificial terracotta pot was placed right at the front of the tank. And, from a human perspective, that makes total sense, right? We put things at the front so we can see them. We want front row seats to the action. But the fish? They only occasionally used this front cave. Instead, they were consistently retreating to the back. So essentially, the fish were flat out rejecting their humans' interior design choices. That pot was meant to be a safe haven, but by putting it in literally the most exposed part of the tank, it completely missed the mark for these super security-conscious cichlids.
Responding to all this data, Ang made two rapid, really targeted environmental optimizations. First up, switching to a softer, finer substrate for the bottom. This fundamentally changes the ground the fish are interacting with every single day. Second, and this directly addresses those behavioral observations, Ang moved the terracotta cot all the way to the back of the tank, placing it right next to the coral. These are highly actionable environmental solutions. By relocating their shelter to the exact zone the fish naturally run away to, Ang is finally working with their instincts instead of fighting against them.
This really highlights a complete shift in philosophy. On one side, you have the old setup, this very human-centered aesthetic where the pot was at the front, totally fighting the fish's natural instincts. But on the other side, the new setup. The pot is moved to the back near the coral, and it's paired with that brand new, finer substrate. It's a purely fish-centered environment now. It successfully aligns the physical architecture of the tank with the actual behavioral psychology of the fish living inside it. But hey, making physical changes is really only half the battle here. In the journal, Ang notes, "For the time being, I'm waiting for the aquarium environment to settle before introducing the Kribensis cichlids." You can't just completely upend an ecosystem, move all the furniture around, and then just drop the fish right back in. Waiting is a highly active, deliberate measure. It's a calculated move to prevent another unexplained failure, and it shows a really deep respect for just how delicate aquatic life can be. So that brings us to the ultimate question. Will these careful, observation-driven optimizations finally lead to a successful mating tank? We've seen this awesome transition from a human-centered design to a completely fish-centered reality. But for sure, the true test lies in the waiting. And when you look at how meticulously Ang aligned this habitat with the biological needs of the fish, it kind of forces a bigger question for us. In our own projects, whether we're building habitats, products, or massive systems, are we designing for our own human preferences? Or are we truly observing and designing for the reality of the user? Definitely something to chew on until next time.